الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم علمنا ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا زدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. So just to let people know how we usually do this, how we did this with the last book, Man, Law, Justice on Earth, is I'm going to just speak. I'll cover parts of the book. I won't read word for word. I'll try my best to summarize, but I'm going to talk for maybe 30 to 40 minutes. And then after that, I'll hand it back to Ustaz Mahdi, and we're going to do Q&A. That'll be for anyone to answer questions. So you can put your hand up if you want to put a question in the chat box. If you want to use your microphone and speak, it's up to you. So alhamdulillah, we're now on to the second book of the series. So Inward Sin, Batin al-Ithm by Imam Ramadan. And I did leave a message on the group yesterday, and I shared a story which is in Man and Laws, Justice on Earth. It's in the first book. The story of Umar al-Khattab giving advice, giving advice to Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas as he's going out to the Battle of Qadisiyah. And the summary of that advice is he says that you have to fear this army, this Muslim army that's going out. They have to fear their own selves more than they fear the enemy, more than they fear the enemy army. Because that's what will destroy them. If they fall into sin, Allah won't help them. If they're engaged in sin, not just outward but inward, that will lead to their own destruction. Whereas if we are obedient to Allah, that's what gives us victory. That's what Umar Khattab was saying. He said we don't get victory because we have greater numbers or because we have better equipment or any of these things, or just because we're Muslims. That's not true. We are granted victory because our obedience to Allah is better. That's what grants us victory. So that's a way to link the previous book with this book. So we'll start, inshallah, on page 9 in the Roman numerals. And I wanted to start here with Imam Tawfiq al-Bulti's foreword. So this is the son of Imam Muhammad Sayyid al-Buti, his son Muhammad Tawfiq, because we asked him to write a foreword for this, for our translation. And he lays out the reasons why this book was written. So he says this book was originally written in the 70s, the previous century. So we're looking at 50 years ago when this book was written. This book was first written 50 years ago. And he talks about this was a time when dawah activity was at its peak. Interesting. It's an interesting thing to think back, but he says, like, this is what a time, this is his view. He says that back 50 years ago, this was when dawah activity was peak. Everyone was talking about dawah, like calling people to Islam, or maybe even calling Muslims back in towards being committed believers, calling people back into the messages, calling people back towards righteousness. And Sheikh Tawfiq, because obviously he was alive at that time, because he's in his 70s now, so he was alive at that time. And he says, I remember at that time that there were people who were affiliated with the Dawah movement. They really loved this book. They really loved this book. They welcomed it. They accepted it. But then there were other people who were angry about this book. There were people who were angry about this book, and they complained about it, and they actually warned their followers against it. Right? Very, very odd. And he says this is despite the fact that the book doesn't focus on any particular group, right? This book is not attacking any particular group or organization or tariqah, jama'ah, what have you. Imam al-Buti is not doing that, right? And as Imam al-Buti goes on to say, he says if I had done that, that would have been the worst kind of inward sin, right? If I tried to write a book, about inward sin and purifying yourself, but the hidden objective behind it is to criticize a group of Muslims or a group of people, that would be the worst kind of inward sin, right? That would be the complete contradiction of what I'm trying to teach here, of what I'm trying to convey. The opposite. So Sheikh Tawfiq goes on to explain. He says, outward sin, everyone knows, outward sin refers to the sins of the limbs and the organs. So the tongue, the eyes, the hands, the feet, all these things. So that's backbiting, slandering, looking at what you should not be looking at. But inward sin is what the devout worshippers, the Rabbaniyun, this is what they warn against. So inward sin, they warn against it. Why? Because its effects are more dangerous. You can't really see them, right? So he says people are not aware of it, but Allah is aware of it. So he gives a list. He says this includes ostentation, which is like the riyah, right? Where you're doing things to show off. Right, that's an inward sin. So if you're if you're praying in a masjid and you know that someone's watching you, so you make your prayer longer, right? Or you improve your qira'ah because you know someone's there. That's what, yeah, right? You're not beautifying your prayer for Allah. You're not beautifying your prayer because, or lengthening your prayer for Allah. You're doing it because someone else is there. That's what, yeah. These are things that they kind of creep up on you. You're not really aware of them. Then he talks about envy, right? Envy, a huge one, right? Envy, which usually is hased. It could also be seen as jealousy. And envy, this is discussed as well in al-Wafi, the commentary on the 40 Nawawiyah, because there's a hadith in there that talks about this case, because hased, and I've discussed this in so many study circles before, but hased is when you're upset, you're angry that someone else has something that you don't want, right? And you might break it down into different categories. You might have this idea where I just don't want him to have it. I don't want him or her to have it, or I want him or her to lose it, and then for me to have it. That's what I want. But either way, the core of envy, right? If you really think about it, the core of envy is kufr, because you're criticizing Allah's distribution of things, right? You're questioning Allah's distribution of his gifts, of his blessings, right? Because Allah's the one who's decided. Allah's decided to give this person such and such a thing, and this person something else. This person got the promotion and this person didn't. This person got the Benz and this person didn't. That's Allah's decision. You can't question that. What, do you know better? No. So that's the danger of envy. And then he talks about arrogance, malice, right? People seeing themselves as better than others, malice, having sort of this ill intention towards people. And its effects manifest themselves in the relationship between peoples and groups. So he's getting into the core reason here. So if we're talking about just in the context of dawah, because we're not getting into just your own personal relationship with Allah, yeah, because that's going to come in the book, your own personal relationship with Allah. But what Sheikh Tawfiq is getting at here is how when Muslims get together in jama'at and in groups and they try to do good things, right? So whether it's, you can go all the way up to the level of a madhab, down to a level of a jama'ah, a tariqah, a charitable organization, an institute, any sort of work you're doing, he says that it's these inward sins that can sink things, that can ruin things, because not everyone is sincere, not everyone's on the same page. And that's why he says that the threat it poses is utterly destructive. So he says divesting dawah work of personal group interests is of utmost importance. So what this means, essentially, what this means is it's very, very important to understand that all, or whatever other jama'at are out there, the purpose of a jama'ah, again, or of a madhab or of a tariqah or whatever else, is that everything is a means towards an end, right? The end is what? The end is Allah, right? We're all seeking Allah, but people have different groups or affiliations that they follow, right? So, for example, if I'm a Shafi in fiqh, and that's my madhab, right? And think about madhab, it comes from the word dhahaba, right? It's like a place where I go. It's it's almost like a path. It's a madhab, right? That's my means of worshiping Allah and drawing nearer to Allah, right? Someone else might be a Hanbali, someone else will be a Maliki, someone else will be a Hanafi. They're all means leading to Allah. If I start claiming that no, the success of the ummah lies in everyone becoming a Shafi'i, everyone has to follow my madhab, that's the only way it has to be, that ruins everything, because now I've taken a means and I've turned it into an end. I've turned that means into an end. So everyone has to follow this, right? And that's the example of just a madhab, right? That's just a madhab, but that applies across the board. As soon as you turn your jama'ah or your tariqah or whatever it is into the end in and of itself, like everyone has to join us, everyone has to be with us. Well, that's not really a sincere intention, is it? Because you're not thinking about Allah as the goal. You're thinking about you as the goal and your group and your congregation and so on and so forth. And that ruins things, right? The means become in and of themselves, right? So I think of like a good analogy could be thinking like Hajj or Umrah, right? When we go for Hajj or Umrah, the objective is the same for everyone. Everyone's aiming for Mecca. Everyone's got the same objective, but we all get there different ways, right? I'll take a flight from Manchester. You'll take a flight from Singapore. So-and-so will take a flight from Cape Town. So-and-so will take a flight from New York. So-and-so will take a flight from Cairo. I can't say, no, you all need to fly from Manchester. It'd be better for you. No, because people are different. People are different. People have different circumstances in their lives. So we don't put these personal or group interests at the front, right? Rather, everything has to be subdued and surrendered and subjugated for the pleasure of Allah. And then, so Sheikh Tawfiq, he goes on to say that his father was very, very vigilant about this, right? About personal or group interest taking over the good work that groups do, right? So people start using the group that they belong to ever as a vehicle for their own personal means and own personal ambitions. You see, so Imam, he's saying his father, Imam al-Buti, rahimahullah, was very vigilant. He was very cautious about this, but this should not be allowed to happen, because that is what will ruin the work. And then he goes on, Imam Tawfiq, to make dua for his father, to ask Allah to bless him, to have mercy on him for being a caller, for being a guide. And then he thanks our team for the work we've done. That would be me and Ustaz Jalaluddin and also Dar al-Fikr. Alhamdulillah. So we move on to the next page, which is the introduction to the second edition. This is what I would like to cover today, these introductions at least, and maybe look at the first chapter. So he says, Imam Muhammad Sayyid, he praises Allah, and he says, blessings on the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And he says, the truth is bitter, right? That's the first thing, is that the truth is bitter. And he says, maybe the most specific cause of its bitterness is what happens when it is revealed and disclosed, right? People are criticized for what they've done, and they feel exposed. But rather, or I should say, this bitterness is not mitigated unless people actually travel the path with sincerity, and they don't try to let their ego get attached to it, right? So, sorry, I've got some fruit flies on my camera. I've had this problem since yesterday. Don't get alarmed. It's not a major creature. It's something the size of an amoeba, but it's crossing my camera. Don't be alarmed. So the point here is that the truth can be bitter, because what he's getting at is, if we're doing, quote unquote, dawah work or Islamic work, right? And we're involved in a good organization. Maybe we work for a charitable organization. Maybe we're part of a tariq, maybe we're part of a jama'ah, and we're doing something effective, right? Let's say that we're doing that, and we can see positive results. You can see that people are responding to the work we're doing. They're enjoying the work we're doing. They like what we're producing. What can then happen there is, if you're in that situation, certain amounts of arrogance can creep in. Arrogance can creep in and think, oh wow, we are doing good things. We are doing impressive work. We are making things happen. This is good, right? But then someone else might come along and just point out something that could be improved, right? Something that could be improved, something that could be changed, right? Someone said, well, I think it would be better if you did this. I think it would be better if you changed this. I think it would be better, right? And then you might react and say, why would I listen to you? Can't you see what we're doing? Can't you see the impressive work that we're putting out there? Can't you see how many people are happy? Why would I listen to you? But that person could have genuine, sincere advice. They may have noticed something, right? And that's why the truth can be bitter. Whereas if you remove yourself from that arrogance, remove yourself from any feelings of superiority or thinking that you're doing such a great job, and you think, you know what? Let me heed that advice, because I have to understand that I'm always open to improvement. I'm always open to improvement. Okay. And that's a key thing. That's a key thing, not just at the group level, at the personal level, is you have to keep telling yourself that there is always room for improvement. There's always room for improvement, right? There's always. So fundamentally, there are always ways for you to improve your relationship with Allah. Always. You should never, ever get into that disease, because that's a disease. Another disease is the disease of self-satisfaction, where you think, well, I'm doing good enough, right? My relationship with Allah is A-okay. It's just swell. It's fine. Well, no, that there's always room for improvement. I mean, so this is just to give you a little foretaste. This is a book that's in the pipeline. Ustaz Mahdi doesn't mind mentioning, but there's a book we have in the pipeline um, on the topic of depression and anxiety. It's based on a TV series by Imam al-Buti. And one of the things that's going to come up when you look at that book, that's my insectide friend. One of the things that's going to come up is the issue of when is if you are feeling depressed or anxious, if you're in that situation where you're feeling depressed or anxious, before jumping to the conclusion that you have some sort of clinical illness, right? That you're clinically depressed, like you've actually been diagnosed as a doctor as having some sort of mental illness. Before jumping to that conclusion, maybe you need to look at your relationship with Allah, right? Are you in a state of true dhikr of Allah? Are you in a state of true gratitude to Allah? Are you fully cognizant? Are you fully aware of who you are and what your role is in this world, right? Are you fully aware of that? Do you actually know who Allah is? Do you know what's going to happen when you die? Are you aware of all these things, right? Before you jump to that conclusion, think about that, right? And don't be offended by that. Don't think, oh no, my relationship with Allah is great. How dare you? How dare you imply that? No. I'm not saying you're a sinner. I'm not saying that you're a fasik. I'm not saying that you're, remote from Allah and you're just wallowing in sin. I'm not saying that. I'm saying maybe there are some ways, and there are, there are some ways for you to improve your relationship with Allah. That's what it comes down to. There are some ways for you to improve your relationship with Allah, because there always are for everyone. So, Imam al-Buti goes on, and he says, no matter how bitter these facts are, they're beneficial, right? We have to get to the truth of why something's not working. So again, whether it's on the personal level, on the group level, we have to get to the truth of why something's not working or why something needs to be improved, right? If we ignore the facts and reality, we're never going to solve the problem, right? We should welcome the facts. We should welcome the evidence. We should welcome the truth of the matter. We should never shy away from it and think, well, I don't want to say that because it might offend so-and-so, or I'm going to reject it because it offends me. No, we have to learn to accept the truth. Even if it is bitter, no matter how bitter it is. So he says, by observing one's own self and criticizing one's own mistakes, one can then warn others against deviating the way he deviated and making the same mistakes he made. Right? Because again, and that's a further step. So once you've been able to sit back and analyze your own mistakes, the mistakes that you've made, that's puts you in a position where you can give sincere advice to other people and say, listen, I was there and I made that mistake and I overlooked that thing and then I fell into trouble. So listen to me. Please listen to me. So Imam al-Buti goes on to say, he says, is there any error or delusion in what I'm saying, right? So like, if I made a mistake, am I delusional in what I'm saying, right? And he's not talking about himself in the sense of like everything he says is, perfect and immaculate and impeccable or infallible. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. He's showing that no, what he's saying is backed up by the Quran and the Sunnah. So he says, this is the foundation of what I'm saying here. However, what I'm saying in these papers or in the pages of this book, they do strike a nerve with people. They do strike a nerve with people because they are critical of people and they attempt to rectify the situation. And this discomfort has some strange repercussions, which I don't want to go into. And he said, I'm not infallible. I'm not claiming to be infallible, but what I'm saying here is backed up by the evidence, is backed by the Quran and the Sunnah, and there's no other way to say it, right? So essentially, like Sheikh Tawfiq's alluded to, what he's saying is that we boil it all down. Group work, when people try to do group work in the field of da'wah, in the field of these Muslim organizations, when people let their inward sins take over, when people are motivated by arrogance or by jealousy or by envy or by malice, whatever it is, this ruins the work. Right? It doesn't, outwardly these people could be great. Outwardly, these people, they pray 5 times a day, they go to the masjid, they They fast, they pray tahajjud, they give their zakat. Outwardly, they could be great people. But if there's inward things, that's going to ruin the work. And then he says this goes down to the hadith, ad-dinu nasiha, right? The religion is sincere advice. This religion is sincere advice. I'm just trying to give sincere advice. And he talks about how the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would criticize without mentioning names, right? He'd criticize without mentioning names. He wouldn't say so-and-so did this. He would say, why do certain people do such and such? Right? It's not good if certain people, he doesn't mention people by names, right? And the odd thing is that sometimes when people react to things, they expose who that person was, right? Like I mean, I remember, for example, like because I'm an English teacher. I've been an English teacher, never teach for a long time. And there's one time when I was in Morocco, I used to teach English. And when I was marking my students' writing papers, their writing assignments, I would never try to attribute the mistake to the person. Right. So what I would do is I would mark all the papers, and then I would make a separate list of all the mistakes that they'd made. Right. And then what I would do in class is I would hand back everyone's writing assignment, and then I would go to my list, and then I'd write on the board. I'd say, okay, someone in this class, I'm not mentioning a name. I'll say someone in this class wrote this, right? Used this word, or wrote this sentence, or used this expression. And I would say, okay, what is wrong here? What's the mistake here? And I'm not trying to pick on anyone. I'm not mentioning any name, right? But if someone in the class gets angry and says, no, that's right, there is no mistake, it's like, it's you, isn't it? You're the one, right? You're the one who wrote this. I was trying to cover you. I was trying to hide your mistake, right? I looked it up in the dictionary. Yeah, but now you've exposed yourself, right? That's kind of what Imam al-Buti is saying here, right? So I'm not mentioning anyone by name. I'm not criticizing anyone. I'm not pinpointing a certain individual or a certain group, right? But if someone reacts to what I'm saying and says, you're wrong, it's like, well, you kind of revealed yourself as that's who I was speaking about, or maybe that's who I was alluding to, or maybe I wasn't even alluding to that person, right? But people expose themselves by doing this. And Imam al-Buti talking about his book, because again, this is his introduction to the second edition, right? So the first edition was published way back in the 1970s. And he says, listen, if I've made a mistake, I've always listened closely. Like he said, if I made a mistake, if I forgot to include something, if some fact escaped me or whatever, I'm always open to being corrected. Correct me, remind me, get in touch with me, right? But he says, I haven't heard from anyone, right? He said, he said, for example, someone responded to something. I said that our problems are moral, not educational. And someone got back to me and said, no, our problems are educational, not moral. Right? That's one criticism. He said, someone else criticized him. I think he mentioned somewhere else. Someone criticized him and said, you're ignoring education. He said, no, I'm not ignoring education. Education is important, but again, there has to be the sincerity. There has to be the morality. And he says as well in the beginning, and towards the end of this introduction, he says, perhaps it is I am the one who is in the most need of this benefit. I'm the most need of this teaching. So again, he's not picking on any individual group. So he says, I've never said, he says, what I'm saying is the Muslims' problem is the calamity has afflicted their morals. So eventually what we're facing is a moral problem, right? It's not an educational problem, it's a moral problem. And education is like the next level up. Fundamentally, it's a moral problem. And he says, this despite the certainty, he gives a good analogy. He says, Muslims cannot live without education and knowledge, right? Muslims cannot live. We cannot live without education and knowledge, just as a sick person, an invalid, cannot live without the sun and without air. However, the sun and the air is not going to lift the problem, right? The sunshine and the air, and the oxygen, that's not going to cure the invalid. He needs them. It's not going to cure his disease, right? It's his medicine that's going to remove his disease. So, and he says, what I'm doing is I'm not writing this out of malice or rancor to expose any particular group or congregation. And he says, how could I do that? If I was doing that, that would be the worst example of what is found in the book Inward Sin. But he says, rather, this is an ummah that needs this, it needs this remedy, right? We need to get to the core of these inward problems, right? Before we solve and try to deal with the outward enemy, right? Because this goes back to again what Umar Khattab was saying to Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, right? You have to fear yourselves, like what's inside you, before or fear that more than the actual Persian army. Fear that more, because that's what will destroy you. And then he finishes with the ayah, in Surah Al-Qasr, ayah 10, which the translation is, oh, our Lord, forgive us and our brothers who precede us in faith, and do not put any rancor in our hearts towards those who believe. Our Lord, you are gentle and most merciful. And then in the introduction to the first edition, he goes back. So this is the introduction that would have been written way back in the 1950s, sorry, 1970s. And he says that, and he explained that this was a response to a Muslim. So a Muslim brother sent him a question. Muslim brother sent him a question. So he says, my Muslim brother, you asked me out of pain and agony, like you were in a state of pain and agony, and you asked me this question. So the question is basically this. There are more Muslims today than there were in the past. Okay, so the Muslim Ummah keeps growing and growing, right? The Muslim Ummah is massive now compared to what it was in the past, right? We're looking at probably nowadays like 1.8 billion people, okay? And the efforts that they make for the sake of Islam are more prominent than any time before, right? So again, we have bigger numbers now. We also see Muslims producing. There's so many organizations out there. There's so many publishing houses. There's so many schools and madrasas and universities. There's so much Muslim activity, right? Way more than there was in the past. So, and that's what he says. The bookshops are replete with all kinds of modern books in a way we've never seen before. People are flocking towards them with great enthusiasm. And despite all of this, they're striving, right? So the Muslims striving for the sake of the Islamic community, for the Ummah, and for the return to supremacy, like in order to bring Muslims back to that position they were in the past. It seems to just keep going backwards. It's reverting and regressing. It's going backwards and not going forwards. So he says, like, what's the secrets behind this astonishing contradiction? He said, how can natural antecedents not produce their natural consequence? Right. So in other words, he's saying, it's like saying, how can I light a piece of paper on fire and it doesn't burn? Right? How can I put a garment in water and it's not wet? It doesn't make any sense. Right. So there's all this activity, there's all this all these organizations, there's mass numbers of Muslims, but we're not seeing anything. What's going on? How come Muslims are not back to where they were, say, like, the peak of the Ottoman Empire or the peak of the Abbasid Empire? How come we're not there anymore? What's going on? What's the missing ingredient? What's the missing component? And he says, I've told you the answer before, right? The Muslims are scattered and divided. That's what he talks about. The Muslims are scattered and divided. That's one thing, right? There's disunity. So you see these Muslim organizations, but are they working together? And are they working with the same objective and supporting one another? No. You can have competing organizations, competing individuals. And that's a tribulation, and it corrupts every righteous action and prevents them from bearing fruit. And he said, how can the people of evil come together upon their false and they continue to cooperate and coordinate so well, while the people of righteousness cannot come together upon their truth? Right? So you have evil people plotting and planning, and they can come together and they can work together. Why can't we do it? Right? Why can't we come together? And he says that the people of evil are very, very desperate, right? They're very, very desperate, and they know that they have to come together or they won't achieve anything, right? So because they're so embroiled in sin, and it's like Shaitan is helping them, right? Because you have to understand the way Shaitan works. The way Shaitan works is Shaitan doesn't waste his time, or a great deal of his time, I should say, on people who are doing evil. If people are doing evil and they have evil intentions and they're corrupt, right? They're gonna be able to work in a lot more efficiency, because the Shaitan's gonna leave them alone because he knows what they're doing. They're obeying him, right? Whereas righteous people try to get together and do something, Shaitan works very hard on them, right? Imam Sha'arawi talks about this in the tafsir. He says, don't think that Shaitan wastes his time going to brothels and nightclubs and these kinds of places, right? He gets to people when they're praying. He gets to people when they're reciting Quran. That's when he comes to people and he tries to mess around with them, right? I don't know if I mentioned this before. I mentioned this in a class recently. If, for example, there's a story that Imam Nawawi relates in his introduction to the Majmu'ah. And it's a question about Imam Abu Hanifa was asked a question by someone, right? Now, and Imam Abu Hanifa totally understood how shaitan works. Genius. He understood how Imam Abu Hanifa works. So a man came to Imam Abu Hanifa and he said, I buried my treasure. I had some money or some treasure, and I buried it outside the city. I believe this was Kufa. I buried this outside the city, and I can't but I don't remember where I put it exactly. Right? It's in some place outside the city. I know the general area, but I don't remember exactly where I buried it. I'm not sure. What do I do? So Imam Abu Hanifa, he said, okay, tonight go back to that area, go back to that general area, and pray tahajjud. Go back to that general area, pray tahajjud, and come back to me tomorrow. So the man goes away, he does this. He comes back to Abu Hanifa the next day. He says, I found my treasure. I found it. And Imam Abu Hanifa says, I knew shaitan would leave you alone. I knew shaitan, because he knew that you go and you pray tahajjud and you're there, shaitan is going to come and try to distract you, right? It's like, he's going to do it, right? That's what shaitan works. We have to bear that in mind, right? So it's going to be easier for the people of wickedness to get stuff done, right? Because for us, shaitan's working hard on us when we try to get righteous things done, right? To put stuff in our hearts, to create animosity between people, to create enmity between people, to create fitna between people. Shaitan is working extra hard with us. We have to bear that in mind. So he goes on to say here, they're all these people of weakness, they are all sincerely striving for their common falsehood. They cannot turn their backs on one another, even if they do have different agendas behind their main objective, right? So they're so in addition to shaitan, these people are very, very desperate for what they have, right? And they know that we have to work together to get this evil plot done. We have to work together. Whereas the people of righteousness, we don't have that same dedication. And again, he says the truth of this group is cowering the end of a road, cut off and deprived, while the other groups' falsehood is crouching at the core of the ego's desires and lusts. And again, it's like understanding that the path to paradise is like a prickly, thorny road. The path to the fire is smooth, it's paved with gold. It's a very easy path, right? The path to the fire is very, very easy. The path to paradise is a struggle, right? So that's, again, people of falsehood, they can use all the alluring lights. It's very, very attractive. They can suck you in, bring you in. What we have to offer is hard work. What we have to offer is responsibility. What we have to offer is dedication. It's not the same thing. It's like offering a diet versus a banquet, right? You want to stuff your face every day with delicious foods, or do you want to work out and stick to a strict diet? It's very similar. And he says there are people among people of righteousness, there are people who adorn themselves with truth and the open call to it, but secretly they're feeling out their desires and lusts, meaning they're still exploring things, right? So outwardly they're righteous, but inwardly they're still following certain passions and lusts, right? There's an inward thing that's still corrupt. There are people who talk about the truth and speak about repealing gathering of speeches, but if the truth commands them to something else, such as foregoing some of their rights or bearing some hardship, they abandon and disregard it. Right? So there might be people who they'll preach, they'll openly preach, say, this is what we have to do, and this is the truth, and so forth. But if the truth tells them that they have to bear some sort of hardship, they have to relinquish something that they really like or whatever, they're not interested. They pull back, right? They buckle. So if this phenomenon is widespread, then the confidence breaks down. People stop trusting one another. People start having confidence in one another. And the work that people are doing falls apart. So again, we have to be sincere in what we're seeking. So he says, just to finish this off, he says, my Muslim brother, I remember when I answered this question, you were drowning in a whirlpool of painful silence, and then you got up and you were still lost in thought. right? So when he actually explained it, he gave this answer to this person. He said, listen, the problem is why Muslims have not, despite all this activity, despite all these numbers, why Muslims have not climbed up the ladder again of civilizational supremacy, or whatever you want to call it. And he said, listen, we have inward problems. We have all this greed, we have this envy, we have this malice, we have this disunity. He says this Muslim brother just got up and left, right? He was just so disillusioned. He was like, and he just left. So then Imam al-Buti, he then went back to himself and he was just thinking, okay, well, did I say something wrong? Did I hurt this brother? What did I do? And he actually felt agony. He said, like, I think I've actually broken that brother's heart. I don't know how do I rectify this? And this is what pushed him to write the book. He says, okay, now I have to actually write the book and lay this all out for the brother, right? And to show him that it's not just a problem that we have and there's no solution to it. It's like, no, nothing's. Imam al-Buti didn't mean like, well, we're disunited and we have all these inward problems and what can we do about it? No. Yes, we have these inward problems, but there's a way to address it. So he said, it is a bitter remedy to swallow, but what mitigates its bitterness is the sweetness of faith, right? There's a way out of this. We come back to Allah. We come back to the sweetness of faith. And he says, yes. And he says, the secret is to relinquish the inward sin. We have to get rid of the inward sin. We have to subdue this inner enemy. The outward enemy, yes. The outward sins, drinking, fornicating, yes, absolutely. But we have to address these inward sins first. And they, of course, they are inseparable. They are inseparable. And he says, and the problem we have, this is what he finished off in the introduction, he said, but the problem we have in this day and age is that we have these inward sins, and they're hard to preach against because outward sins are obvious, right? If you're an imam of a community, or you're a dad, you're a teacher, and you see, for example, you can see that backbiting is taking place, or gossiping is taking place, or there's a bar in the neighborhood. You can see all these outward things, you can preach against them, but you can't really detect if jealousy is prevalent, or envy is prevalent, or arrogance. You can't really measure it. So it's hard to preach against these things because they're kind of hidden. So this is why he writes the book. So we'll look quickly. I'll just talk about this thing. So on page 13, this is what I'll finish on. It talks about the inward and the outward, or religion and judgment. Okay, so this is the point I'll finish on. This is on page 13. This comes up in the book. It's an important point. The point about qada'an with diyanatin. Okay, qada'an with diyanatin. It's an important concept to understand. When we talk about sins, there are sins that are diyanatin. There's sins that come when they're called qada'an. So qada'an, you should think of the qadi, right? It means that the qadi can do something about it. It's knowledge of the qadi, he can do something about it. Whereas if it's diyanatin, it's between you and Allah. It's between you and Allah, right? So, for example, in the first hadith in this book, in the Huquq al-Zawjayn, it talks about how a woman doesn't understand the right of her husband until she doesn't sit down until he's finished his meal, right? So this is a right that the husband has. But he says this is diyanatin. It's not qada'an, meaning it's happening in the house, right? The qadi can't do anything about it because it's happening in the house, right? So it's a matter between the husband and the wife. And the wife knows whether she's fulfilling that right. That's between her and Allah. Another example, because when I was doing research for that book, another example of qada'an with diyanatin would be, for example, if a man says a kinaya statement, like not a direct statement, like sarih, but a kinaya statement to his wife, which could be interpreted as divorce. It doesn't clearly indicate divorce, but it could be interpreted as divorce. So a man says to his wife, "Get out of my house." That's the words he says, "Get out of my house." Okay. And let's say he actually meant divorce when he said that. So it's a kinaya statement, "Get out of my house," but he actually meant you're divorced. If he goes to a qadi, he goes to a judge, and the qadi says, so this is the idea of qada'in, right? And the qadi says, what did you mean by that? What did you mean when you said "get out of my house"? This man could lie. And he can say, no, I just meant get out of my house for a few hours because I need a break and I'm tired and you were just annoying me. Okay? The qadi at that point, he says, okay, fine, you're still married. Because the qadi can't do anything beyond that. The qadi does not, he cannot see the unseen. He doesn't, he's not alim al-ghayb. He doesn't have knowledge of the unseen. He's going to say, okay, fine, you're still married, right? But diyanatan, right? In terms of religion, diyanatan, this man's divorced. That's between him and Allah, right? The qadi is not to blame because the qadi doesn't, the qadi can't see what's in his heart. The wife's not to blame because she doesn't know what's in his heart, but this man is, right? So that's the difference between Qabal and diyanatan, and that's what we're going to get into next time, inshallah, the inward and the outward, or religion and judgment. So we don't want to be in a situation where, yes, outwardly things are sound. Like the colleagues say, yeah, you're married. Outwardly everything's sound, but then like inwardly it's not. If it's inwardly corrupt, then there's not going to be any success. Alhamdulillah, ala rasulillah.